Ryder Crusher Daniels was the kind of man who drew stares wherever he went, and he loved it. Towering at well over 6 feet, with a rugged leather jacket clinging to his broad shoulders and a full bristling beard concealing half his face, Ryder cultivated the image of a fearsome leader. His nickname, Crusher, had been earned early in his days of bar fights and motorcycle rallies, often accompanied by a sly grin that signaled either mischief or danger. People who crossed paths with him learned to tread lightly, because in Ryder's world, respect was something to be enforced. He had a gang of similarly rough-and-tumble bikers, all of whom looked up to him not just for his size and strength, but for his knack for stirring up trouble. If there was a noisy prank to be played or a raucous challenge to be launched, Ryder was the one orchestrating it. On the day that everything went wrong, Ryder and his gang rumbled along an empty highway under a golden sun that seemed almost too serene. He wasn't looking for a serious showdown. Not yet, anyway. He just wanted a place to stretch his legs and entertain himself before the next big gathering. His companions, wearing their own leather vests and carrying years of dust from endless road trips, followed him without question. They passed crooked signposts pointing to small, sleepy towns, and Ryder mentally flipped through his options. Find a bar, pull into a diner, or just roll through until something caught his attention. Eventually, he spotted a little settlement nestled around a narrow main street, lined with quaint storefronts, and a sense of anticipation stirred inside him. As they neared the heart of town, Ryder took stock of the place. The buildings were old-fashioned, but well-maintained, their wooden porches painted in pastel shades. The street was clean, and the air seemed freshly swept, as if someone had tidied up right before the bikers arrived. It was precisely the sort of scene that made Ryder grin. Too peaceful, too perfect, ripe for a little chaos. He signaled his gang to slow down, the roars of their engines dropping to a throaty rumble. People walking along the sidewalks paused, mothers subtly guiding children inside stores, while older folks peered curiously from behind screen doors. Ryder could almost smell their anxiety. He guided the group to a small cafe that sat on a corner, its cheerful sign reading, Parker's Cozy Brew. Outdoor tables were scattered under wide umbrellas, and a row of potted flowers lined the entrance. Customers sipped coffee, nibbling on pastries and chatting in hushed tones. The hum of conversation ceased the moment the motorcycles rolled up. Leaning back on his seat, Ryder sized up the scene with an amused smirk. With a wave of his hand, he killed his engine, the echo of which lingered in the silent air. He relished this feeling, the hush that fell over onlookers when trouble was in town. At his silent command, his fellow bikers parked alongside him, and together they dismounted, leather boots hitting the pavement with an audible thump that seemed to jolt the atmosphere. Ryder took a moment to survey the onlookers, delighting in their wide-eyed stares. He recognized that mixture of wariness and curiosity. It was the same look he'd seen countless times in small towns and suburban pockets that never expected a motorcycle gang to show up at their door. One by one, the patrons at the cafe's outdoor tables averted their eyes, as though hoping the rowdy newcomers would simply pass by without causing a scene. Yet Ryder thrived on scenes. He let his gaze wander until it settled on something he found unexpectedly interesting. 2 dogs, resting calmly near the cafe's entrance. The first was a golden retriever, its coat gleaming in the midday sun, its gentle eyes giving off an almost benevolent air. Next to it was a sleek Doberman, posture perfect, exuding quiet vigilance. They both looked well-groomed and well-trained, the sort of dogs that probably had a considerate owner who took them everywhere. Something about their placid contentment ruffled Ryder. He liked to provoke reactions, from people, from animals. It hardly mattered. Turning toward one of his biker buddies, he jerked his chin in the direction of the dogs. "Look at those pampered pets," he said under his breath, a faint sneer curling his lip. "Actin' like they own the place. Livin' better than half of us, I bet." A ripple of laughter went through his crew, but it was subdued. Even they could sense a tension hanging in the air that went beyond the usual small-town nervousness. Nonetheless, Ryder felt an itch to do something. Something loud, something foolish, something that would remind his gang that he was fearless. He ambled closer to the dogs, his broad shoulders swaying with confidence. The golden retriever watched him, curious but not alarmed, while the Doberman stiffened slightly, ears angling forward. Without warning, Ryder lifted his heavy motorcycle boot and nudged the golden retriever in its side. It wasn't a brutal kick, but it was forceful enough that the dog let out a startled yelp and scrambled backward, tail tucked for a moment in genuine confusion. The Doberman rose to its feet instantly, poised to defend its companion if necessary, but it hesitated, perhaps well trained enough not to lunge unless commanded. A gasp rippled through the patrons. An older woman nearly dropped her coffee cup, while a man in a work shirt froze in mid-sip. The cafe's door was propped open, and from inside, the scraping of a chair drew attention. A few customers stood up, craning their necks to see the confrontation more clearly. For a moment, Ryder simply grinned at the startled reactions, and his friends laughed in a half-hearted way. Then one younger biker mumbled, "Hey man, maybe that wasn't the best idea." Ryder shrugged, dismissing the concern. "Just having a laugh," he muttered. "People need to lighten up." He had no way of knowing that one simple laugh had effectively lit the fuse on an encounter he'd soon regret. Inside the cafe, a tall, broad-shouldered man stood up from a small table by the window. He moved with deliberate grace, setting down his cup of tea with a gentle clink that seemed to echo ominously through the hush. This man was Dwayne Johnson, and while most of the townspeople recognized him from his occasional visits, they also knew him by his quiet demeanor and unmistakable air of confidence. He had a chiseled face that could appear stoic or gentle depending on the situation, and right now, his dark eyes were as cold as steel. He had chosen this little town as a temporary retreat, a break from a busy life that demanded constant travel and a certain level of public visibility. Though many knew him for his film work and physical prowess, in person, he was never one to flaunt it. He preferred to keep a low profile, sipping tea instead of coffee, greeting the cafe owner, Marshall Parker, with polite nods, and occasionally reading a worn paperback novel in the corner booth. Yet all that calm vanished the instant he heard his golden retriever yelp. Marshall Parker, an older gentleman with a kindly face and glasses that perched precariously on the edge of his nose, had also witnessed the kick. He went pale as he met Dwayne's gaze. "Mr. Johnson," Marshall whispered shakily, "I think they've just made a terrible mistake." Dwayne didn't speak. He didn't have to. The soft click of his boots across the wooden floor announced his decision to address the situation. Sliding one hand into the pocket of his jacket, he walked toward the open door. Other customers shrank back, startled at the shift in atmosphere. Moments ago, the cafe had been filled with light-hearted chatter over fresh pastries and artisan brews. Now, an undercurrent of impending conflict dominated every glance and breath. Outside, Ryder was still reveling in the ripple effect of his actions, oblivious to the fact that someone wholly different from the usual cafe clientele was about to emerge. The rest of Ryder's gang seemed uneasy, noting the way the townspeople peered at the cafe's door, as if they anticipated a storm about to break. When Dwayne Johnson finally stepped out, the sunlight hit his face, revealing a calm but focused expression that made people pause. At nearly the same height as Ryder, and even more powerfully built, Dwayne moved as though every muscle was under perfect control. He looked first at his golden retriever, who was shaking off its surprise, then at the Doberman, still in defensive mode, but holding steady. Finally, he fixed his gaze on Ryder Crusher Daniels. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman breathed, "Oh my goodness," in a tone that carried both relief and apprehension. It was clear she knew that the town's unexpected savior was someone capable of halting the situation before it escalated further, if he chose to. But the question was, how would Ryder react? Or rather, what kind of lesson was about to be delivered? Ryder felt the intensity of Dwayne's stare before he heard his voice. That look was so steady, It seemed to peel back every layer of bravado Ryder wore. Yet, pride dictated that he not show an ounce of fear. He locked eyes with the newcomer, squared his shoulders, and let his familiar smirk curve across his lips. Members of his gang hovered at his back, offering silent backup that felt far less reassuring than usual. Something about this situation was different. The air itself felt electric. Dwayne took a few steps forward, placing himself between Ryder and the dogs. The golden retriever seemed to sense it was now safe, inching closer to Dwayne's leg, while the Doberman stood tall on the other side, almost as if guarding its owner's flank. All around, townspeople watched with bated breath. Someone across the street rested a hand on a friend's shoulder, as though to keep them from stepping into the fray. "You kicked my dog," Dwayne said at last, voice low and unhurried, each word weighted with significance. Ryder snorted, trying to maintain his facade of nonchalance. "Yeah, well, it was just a tap," he replied, forcing a laugh. "Don't get all bent out of shape. Besides, the mutt's still standin', ain't it?" A ripple of disapproval moved through the crowd. Some people openly shook their heads. Dwayne said nothing in response to Ryder's dismissive tone. He simply narrowed his eyes, the tension in his stance suggesting patience was wearing thin. One of the younger bikers tugged on Ryder's sleeve, murmuring something about backing off. Ryder shrugged him off, determined not to appear weak. After all, he was Crusher, the man who took on bar brawls for sport, the one his gang idolized. Yet in that tense silence, Ryder realized he was alone in a way he hadn't felt before. The people he usually dominated, unsuspecting patrons, frightened shopkeepers, or random passers-by, always wilted before him. But Dwayne Johnson stood there, solid as a granite statue, unyielding. The biker had a flicker of self-awareness. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't some random local who could be easily intimidated. The next few seconds happened so quickly that half the onlookers missed the sequence. Ryder moved first, stepping aggressively into Dwayne's personal space, perhaps expecting him to flinch or retreat. Dwayne pivoted, using a fluid motion to intercept Ryder's foot as he tried to shove him aside. In a single swift sweep, Dwayne unbalanced the larger man, sending him tumbling backward onto the cafe's gravel walkway. It looked almost effortless, as if Dwayne were redirecting a child in a martial arts class. Ryder landed hard, his breath catching in his throat, while the crowd gasped. No triumphant sneer crossed Dwayne's face. He simply looked down at Ryder, the message clear. You don't put your hands or your feet on someone else's dog without consequences. For a moment, all Ryder could do was stare up at the bright sky, gravel pressing painfully into his back. His cheeks burned with humiliation. Nobody had ever taken him down so swiftly, especially not in front of his own crew. Murmurs swept through the onlookers, some of whom were now exchanging glances that carried hints of relief. Relief that someone had finally stood up to the bully in their midst. Ryder gritted his teeth, forcing himself to ignore the throbbing in his lower back as he scrambled to his feet. "You think you're funny, do ya?" he snarled, wiping dust off his jacket. His gang hovered behind him, uncertain whether to intervene. Usually, they would have leapt into a fray on Ryder's behalf, but something about the absolute calm in Dwayne's demeanor gave them pause. Dwayne merely stood there, arms hanging loosely at his sides, not making a single threatening gesture. It was as if he'd already proven everything he needed to by dropping Ryder once. The golden retriever remained at Dwayne's feet, tail swishing in nervous arcs. The Doberman, still poised, fixated on Ryder as if deciding whether the threat was over or just beginning. Bravado demanded that Ryder press on. His cheeks felt hot with more than just anger. His pride was bruised. This had never happened in front of a crowd that included his own men. Lunging forward, he swung a punch, aiming to catch Dwayne by surprise. But the blow never landed. Dwayne sidestepped with fluid ease, trapping Ryder's wrist and twisting gently in the same motion. Ryder's momentum became his own worst enemy as he was pivoted forward, slamming into a nearby table that collapsed under his weight, shattering plates and spilling drinks everywhere. Heads turned and a collective gasp rang out. Marshall Parker, the cafe owner, grimaced at the destroyed table but said nothing, clearly aware this was bigger than a few broken dishes. Ryder's chest heaved as he pressed a hand to the ground, trying to prop himself up. It was a surreal moment. This was the second time in as many minutes that he'd been bested, and the watchers were no longer petrified, but fascinated, even a bit exhilarated. Still, Ryder refused to concede. He managed to rise to a crouch, panting heavily. "I'm not done," he muttered, shaking off shards of porcelain. His voice carried an edge of desperation now, a tone that hinted he knew how outclassed he was, but couldn't stop his own pride from demanding more. Dwayne exhaled, and in that small gesture was a palpable sense of disappointment. "We can end this any time," he said in a quiet tone. His Doberman let out a low growl, as if seconding the statement. From the periphery, Ryder's gang began to exchange nervous glances. Perhaps some among them realized how outmatched their leader was, but no one dared step forward. They all waited to see if Ryder would finally swallow his pride, or dig himself deeper into embarrassment. Ryder's breathing came in ragged bursts, and his knuckles tightened as he glared at Dwayne. The onlookers pressed closer, forming a hesitant circle that left enough space for the two men to move, but also conveyed a collective curiosity. Even small children, clutching their parents' hands, peeked around legs to watch the drama unfold, ears buzzing with the warnings of "stay back," but too intrigued to fully turn away. Ryder had two choices: retreat or escalate. Driven by a mounting sense of humiliation, he chose the latter. Snarling an oath under his breath, he rushed forward again, attempting a tackle. This time, Dwayne sidestepped and delivered a controlled strike to Ryder's sternum. Not a bone-breaking hit, but powerful enough to knock the air from his lungs. Ryder stumbled, gasping as he fell to one knee. Around them, a wave of shock rolled through the bystanders. Not many had seen a man of Ryder's size brought down so quickly. The golden retriever barked, a high-pitched noise of alarm rather than aggression, while the Doberman held its ground, tail rigid. Dwayne kept his gaze trained on Ryder, assessing whether his adversary had learned anything yet. A hush enveloped the street as Ryder struggled back to his feet, chest still hitching with uneven breaths. He had never felt so vulnerable. "Are we done?" Dwayne asked, his baritone voice carrying a thread of disappointment rather than anger. "You've made your point. You wanted trouble, and you got it." Despite a pounding heart, Ryder tried to save face. You think you're better than me?" he spat, though the question came out as more of a plea for validation. Dwayne's silence answered for him. In those few seconds, a glimmer of uncertainty flickered across Ryder's eyes. This man standing before him wasn't just another random tough guy. The ease with which he'd countered every move suggested serious training and a lifetime of discipline. Ryder felt that old, nagging sensation he usually dismissed, fear, cold and unyielding, trickling into his consciousness. A figure pushed through the crowd, a teenage boy wearing a ball cap, phone in hand, presumably filming. Ryder realized how this would look if it ended up on social media. Him, the legendary Crusher, humiliated by a stranger in a quiet little town. Fueled by wounded pride, he slipped a hand into his pocket and produced a small folding knife. Flicking the blade open, he brandished it in front of him. A chorus of gasps rippled among the bystanders, and a few shouted warnings for him to put it away. Dwayne's expression shifted imperceptibly. He let out a slow breath, as though disappointed to see the conflict escalate. "Don't do this," he said softly. "It's not going to end the way you think." Ryder's face twisted with indecision, but the presence of the camera, along with his battered ego, pushed him forward. He lunged, blade angled for a quick slash. Yet once again, Dwayne's reflexes proved superior. He stepped inside Ryder's swing, seizing the biker's wrist and bending it in a single fluid motion that sent the knife clattering to the ground. Ryder hissed in pain, knees buckling at the shock of how swiftly he'd been disarmed. Time seemed to freeze as the blade bounced on the pavement, each metallic clink echoing in the hush. Ryder's gang stood paralyzed, torn between stepping in to defend their leader and acknowledging the futility of taking on this implacable force named Dwayne Johnson. The townspeople, too, remained motionless, wide eyes fixed on the confrontation. Even the dogs had gone still, every muscle tense. Dwayne maintained a firm hold on Ryder's wrist, his grip unyielding, but not injuring him beyond the sudden shock of pressure. His voice, low and measured, finally broke the silence. "That's enough," he said. "You wanted to feel powerful by picking on my dog. Now you know what it's like to be at someone else's mercy." Ryder opened his mouth to retort, but only managed a strangled sound. His face reddened from both exertion and embarrassment. The crowd, sensing the climax, drew in a collective breath. Slowly, carefully, Dwayne eased up on Ryder's arm, releasing him from the lock. The biker's arm fell limply to his side, and for a moment, he just stared at his own hand, as if confused by its uselessness. There was no immediate applause, no triumphant fanfare, only a profound silence, heavy with the realization that a line had been crossed and decisively repelled. Nearby, Marshall Parker, the cafe owner, peered nervously from behind the safety of a wooden railing, concern etched into his weathered features. He had known Dwayne to be a calm soul, someone who tipped generously and always asked how business was going, but he'd never seen this side of him, a side both formidable and strangely compassionate. Ryder stumbled back a step, then another. A dull throb crawled through his wrist, and he wasn't sure if it was from the disarm or the crushing blow to his ego. He let his gaze flick from the fallen knife to Dwayne's unmoving stance, then past him to the retriever and the Doberman. The golden dog's eyes seemed to peer at him with quiet reproach, as if understanding that it had been hurt for no reason but cruelty. "Let's get out of here," Ryder finally muttered, not meeting his gang's eyes. He felt cornered, stripped of the tough image he had prided himself on. Turning on his heel, he moved toward his motorcycle, ignoring the ache in his wrist. His men exchanged wary looks, though not one of them spoke up to challenge him. They followed without resistance, some pausing to glance back at Dwayne as if to apologize without words. The air slowly released its tension as the bikers mounted their rides. Engines coughed to life once more, but the roar carried a new tone, one of retreat, not victory. A moment later, they were gone, and with them went the heat of confrontation that had gripped the little street. As the thunder of motorcycle engines faded, an almost surreal stillness took over the town's main drag. Bit by bit, people began to relax their tight shoulders and exhale the breath they'd been holding. A teenage girl tucked her phone into her pocket, having captured a piece of drama more thrilling than any reality TV show. Parents exchanged relieved smiles, and the elderly couple by the cafe door leaned into each other, murmuring thanks that no one had been seriously hurt. In the center of it all stood Dwayne Johnson, shoulders still squared, but the coiled tension in his stance now unwinding. The golden retriever hesitated, then pressed gently against his leg, as though checking to make sure everything was all right. Dwayne patted the dog's head, letting his palm glide over the retriever's soft ears. The Doberman circled closer, its vigilant gaze following the departing bikes until the last echo faded away. Only then did the sleek dog relax, nudging the retriever companionably. A collective sense of curiosity replaced the earlier hush as onlookers gravitated toward Dwayne. Marshall Parker stepped forward first, pulling off his apron as if to gather his composure. That was something else," he said, sounding both grateful and stunned. "I've seen men deal with trouble before, but I've never seen it handled quite like that." Dwayne offered a polite nod, not quite smiling, but clearly glad that no further harm had occurred. His gaze drifted to the splintered remains of the cafe table, the toppled chairs, and the shattered plates. With a slight crease in his brow, he remarked, "I'm sorry about the damage. Let me help you replace it." Marshall waved a dismissive hand. That's nothing you need to worry about, Mr. Johnson. If it weren't for you, who knows what might have happened? Least I can do is fix up a table. Might be I'll send the bill to that roughneck if he dares come back." People overhearing the exchange chuckled softly, the tension finally starting to dissolve into mild amusement. A few commented on how the gang members had roared in like they owned the place, only to slink away with their pride wounded. Quiet gratitude flowed among the residents for Dwayne's timely intervention. Eventually, a little boy, around 8, with a nervous grin and freckles across his nose, gathered the courage to approach. He cautiously held out a hand to the golden retriever, who sniffed it and wagged its tail. The boy then looked up at Dwayne with a mix of awe and curiosity. "Mister, is your dog okay?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. Dwayne bent down, placing a reassuring hand on the retriever's shoulder. "She's fine, buddy," he said softly, ruffling the dog's ear. "This fella here," he added, lightly touching the Doberman's collar, "is fine too. They're both tougher than they look." The boy nodded, eyes shining with relief. "That's good," he whispered. Before he could say more, his mother beckoned him back, and he scampered away, tossing a last glance at the unlikely hero. In the minutes that followed, an impromptu cleanup operation began. Marshall Parker fetched a broom and dustpan, while a couple of bystanders assisted in gathering the bigger pieces of the shattered table. Conversations bubbled around them. Some folks dissected the altercation with excited detail, while others wondered aloud if the bikers might hold a grudge and return later. More than a few eyed Dwayne Johnson curiously, as if seeing him for the first time. Not just a quiet man who liked his tea, but someone with the capability to dominate a fight without losing his composure. For his part, Dwayne tried to slip back into the cafe with minimal fanfare, but Marshall insisted on giving him a fresh cup on the house. "After what you did, least I can do is show a bit of hospitality," the cafe owner said, dropping a tea bag into a steaming mug and sliding it across the counter with a grateful nod. Dwayne murmured a thank you and found a table near the window, one that hadn't been broken in the scuffle. The dogs settled at his feet, both now calm and relaxed. If not for the occasional shard of debris still being swept up outside, it might have seemed as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Yet the cafe patrons kept sneaking glances at him, some whispering behind menus, others openly staring. A few of the braver ones ventured close to say, "That was incredible," or "Thank you for stepping in." Dwayne received these acknowledgments with gentle, almost embarrassed nods. Meanwhile, talk of Rider Crusher Daniels and his gang spread like wildfire through the town. Half a dozen cell phone videos from the confrontation were already circulating among the locals, with glimpses of Dwayne effortlessly outmaneuvering the imposing biker. The question on everyone's mind: would Ryder let this go, or would he come back for revenge? While some worried about retribution, others took comfort in the fact that a man like Dwayne was around if trouble revisited. Marshall, wiping sweat from his brow, came over to Dwayne's table after finishing a quick round of cleaning. "You plan on staying in town a bit longer?" he asked quietly. "After all this commotion, I'd understand if you wanted to move on." Dwayne glanced down at his dogs, then back at Marshall. "We'll stay," he replied, his voice calm as ever. "The reason I travel is to find peace and quiet. This place is still more peaceful than most." Marshall chuckled, relief evident in his posture. "Well, I'm glad to hear it," he said, clapping Dwayne on the shoulder. "Just know you've made some friends here today. If that gang ever does come back, you won't be alone." Outside, the late afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the pavement. The tension from earlier had settled into a memory, one the townspeople would likely recount for days, and perhaps for much longer. Dwayne finished his tea and stood up, placing some cash on the counter despite Marshall's protests. He whistled softly for his dogs, stepping out into the evening air with the same unhurried grace he'd shown stepping into the fight. Over the following days, word of the incident spread around the region faster than Ryder's motorcycle could have carried it. The little cafe, Parker's Cozy Brew, became a hotspot for whispered tales of how a gang of hardened bikers had been effortlessly dismantled by a single man, and in some versions, by that man and his two remarkably poised dogs. Some retellings made Dwayne Johnson sound like a silent guardian angel. Others described him as a martial arts master who could have dispatched the entire crew if he'd wanted to. All versions, however, ended with the image of Rider Crusher Daniels slinking out of town under the weight of bruised pride. Surprisingly, neither Ryder nor his gang returned in the immediate aftermath. Some residents speculated he was too humiliated to show his face. Others guessed that the gang might be planning something bigger. In the hush of evening, some townspeople locked their doors and cast anxious glances at the roads leading into town. But day after day, no roaring engines broke the silence. Slowly, the community relaxed, more confident that the confrontation had concluded, at least for now. Dwayne, meanwhile, settled back into his routine with little fuss. He walked his dogs along the town's outskirts, enjoying the dusty trails that wound through fields of tall grass. He continued visiting the cafe, quietly reading or chatting with Marshall Parker about inconsequential topics like the weather or local fishing spots. Townsfolk greeted him warmly, some with a discreet thumbs up, as if to say, "We remember what you did, and we're grateful." He accepted their kindness gracefully, never lingering too long on the details of that day. It was clear he didn't crave accolades or attention for what he viewed as a simple act of doing what was right. Not everyone remained entirely at ease, though. A few wondered aloud, what if Ryder's pride won't let him rest? What if he's just biding his time? In small towns, rumors can seed anxiety quickly, and some older residents, having seen their share of vendettas, worried that no confrontation ends without a lasting grudge. Yet a week passed, then another. No sign of the gang. Life resumed its tranquil rhythm, complete with farmers driving trucks of produce to the weekend market, children riding bikes down the sidewalk, and neighbors meeting for potlucks. Eventually, a rumor surfaced that Ryder's gang had splintered. Some members apparently took the humiliating defeat as a sign that their leader wasn't invincible after all. Others heard he'd picked a fight at another bar several counties over, only to land in more trouble. If true, it seemed Ryder's life was spiraling in a direction fueled by bitterness and resentment. But as these speculations ebbed and flowed, one thing remained certain. In that quiet town, the memory of how Dwayne Johnson had calmly protected his dogs, and by extension, the town's sense of peace, endured in collective lore. On a mild summer evening not long after, Dwayne finished a late meal at the cafe. He gave Marshall Parker a final wave, then stepped out under a sky streaked with orange and pink. His dogs trotted alongside, tails wagging contentedly. A few folks on the sidewalk smiled, nodding hello, and he nodded back. In that tranquil dusk light, the street seemed timeless and safe, as though the events of that fateful day had never occurred. Yet everyone there remembered, and they all knew a certain lesson had been seared into the local consciousness. Some men don't need to shout or bluster to be truly strong.